Get her out of my courtroom in cuffs if she won't sign." Judge Wendell Strick didn't even glance at Geraldine Pruitt as the bailiff approached. 62 years old, dragging a church food pantry through bankruptcy. "And you still think you're some kind of saint," he said, sliding the confession across the table. Geraldine looked down at it without picking it up. "I never stole a dime in my life, Your Honor." Strick laughed, low and ugly, from the bench. "You dressed up theft as charity and dared this town to thank you for it. Sign it," he said, "or lose the house, the pantry, and what's left of your name." The gallery had gone dead quiet. Geraldine set her hands flat on the table instead. Then the courtroom doors opened, and 3 people in crisp federal and military uniforms walked in. And Judge Wendell Strick had no idea they were the children she'd pulled off the street 22 years earlier, back now to burn his case to the ground. The cuffs dug into Geraldine Pruitt's wrists as she stood in front of a courtroom packed tighter than a Sunday service. The metal was cold against brown skin gone thin with age, and at 62, being walked in like a common thief still didn't sit right in her chest, no matter how many times the deputies had done it to her that week. The county-issued smock hung off her shoulders. She'd lost weight since the arrest. Nerves did that to a person, but her spine stayed straight because her mother had raised her to keep her chin level even when the floor broke out from under her. Judge Wendell Strick sat above her, on his carved bench like a man surveying property he already owned. Silver hair combed flat, robe pressed to a knife's edge. Everything about him spoke of country clubs and golf carts. Everything about Geraldine spoke of bus transfers and double shifts. The room was stuffed with people who had no business being there except curiosity. Reporters in the front pews, pens twitching. Behind them, neighbors from Larkspur Avenue, some shaking their heads like they already knew how this ended, others just staring at their shoes, ashamed to be caught looking. In the back row, old Mr. Aldous Penny dabbed at his eyes with a folded handkerchief. Prosecutor Selina Marchetti stood at her table in a charcoal suit that cost more than Geraldine's monthly check from the school cafeteria where she'd worked 31 years. "Your Honor," Marchetti began, "the evidence establishes a pattern of deliberate misappropriation spanning more than 2 decades. Mrs. Pruitt accepted public assistance and private donations while sheltering 3 minors, with no legal claim to them whatsoever." Geraldine's chest pulled tight at that. Those 3 weren't case numbers. They were Renato, Aaliyah, and Theo, and they had been her whole heart, walking around loose in the world for over 20 years. She accepted church donations under false pretenses, Marchetti went on, voice climbing with every sentence. She used those children's faces to wring sympathy out of donors who believed they were funding orphans, not funding fraud. She ignored 17 code violations on her property while pleading poverty to the court. From the gallery, a man named Garrison Lowe watched with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for men who'd already counted their winnings. Pressed gray suit, silver cufflinks, a smile he kept tucked in his pocket for later. Low Capital Partners had been trying to buy up half of Larkspur Avenue for 2 years to build something called Heritage Towers, luxury units with a fountain out front. And Geraldine Pruitt's little brick house sat dead center of the lot like a stubborn tooth that wouldn't pull. He'd offered her money twice. Both times she'd looked at him like he'd offered to buy her grandmother's grave. Furthermore, Marchetti said, hoisting a thick folder, Mrs. Pruitt has accrued over $38,000 in unpaid fines. When served an eviction notice, she barricaded the door and refused entry to inspectors. In the front row, a woman named Carmela Diosa nodded along with every word like she was keeping time to a hymn. City Code Enforcement Officer, 49 years old, passed over for supervisor 3 times in a row, and somewhere along the way that disappointment had hardened into something with teeth. She'd signed off on the inspection reports that called Geraldine's home a hazard. The same broken back step Geraldine had begged the city to fix for 2 winters running. The same leaking roof nobody had bothered to send anyone out for. Geraldine's court-appointed lawyer, a tired man named Burton Hale, leaned over and whispered against her ear, breath sour with old coffee. "Sign the plea, Mrs. Pruitt. Probation instead of prison. You can start fresh somewhere smaller." The words landed like a slap. Start fresh? At 62? Hand over the only home she'd ever owned outright? Confess to a crime she'd never come close to committing? She turned her head, voice quiet but iron underneath. "Mr. Hale, I fed 3 children nobody else wanted to feed. I gave them a roof when this county forgot they were alive. If that's a crime in this courtroom, then fine, I'm guilty as charged. But I will not put my name on a lie just because it's wearing a suit and tie." Judge Strick's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Pruitt, I strongly suggest you listen to your counsel." But Geraldine kept her eyes lowered and her spine straight, and she did not bend. In the holding room, the fluorescent light buzzed like something trapped and angry. Geraldine sat on the metal bench with her cuffed hands folded in her lap and let her mind drift back 22 years, back to when Larkspur Avenue still smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke on Sundays. The house had been quieter then, just her and the memory of Otis, her husband, gone too soon from a heart that finally quit after 26 years running the line at the bottling plant. She'd been 41, widowed, working the cafeteria at Jefferson Middle School, watching the mortgage sit on her chest like a stone she couldn't put down. She'd started helping out at Bright Hope Community Church to keep her hands busy and her mind off the empty side of the bed. Pastor Otelia Vance always needed extra hands for the Thursday supper line. That's where she found Renato. It was a cold October evening. She'd stayed late scrubbing the big steel pots after the church meal, and when she stepped out back to dump the washwater, she heard something rustling behind the dumpster. A boy unfolded himself out of the dark like a shadow that had learned to walk. Couldn't have been more than 11, with eyes that had already seen too much. His sneakers had holes letting in the cold. He had 2 dinner rolls clutched in a fist gone white from squeezing. "You stealing from the church, baby?" she asked. The boy froze solid, every muscle ready to bolt. "I ain't ate since yesterday," he finally said, voice cracking down the middle. Geraldine studied his face and saw real hunger there, the kind that turns children old before their time. "What's your name?" "Renato. Renato Quinn. Where's your mama?" His face folded in on itself. "She's gone. Passed last month. My uncle said he'd take me in, but when I got there he said he already had too many mouths and not enough table." Something in Geraldine's chest cracked clean down the middle. She looked at that boy holding stolen bread like it was the last thing standing between him and the grave. And she thought of Otis as a boy, and she thought of herself if the world had been just a little crueler to her. "Come on inside," she said. "Let me fix you a real plate." That night Renato ate 3 helpings of smothered chicken and rice, eating like the food might vanish if he blinked. She made up the couch and told him he could stay until they sorted things out properly. He stayed for 7 years. 2 months later, Pastor Vance called about a girl named Aliyah. The Greyhound station had found a 9-year-old sitting alone with a garbage bag of clothes and a note pinned inside her coat that read, "Please find her somewhere better than I could." Social services was drowning. Foster placements full clear across the county. Geraldine drove down and found a small girl with sharp, watchful eyes and a spine like a soldier's. The girl didn't cry. She just asked if Geraldine was going to send her back. "Not unless you want to go," Geraldine told her. Aliyah moved into the back bedroom. Renato helped carry her garbage bag up the stairs himself, and that first night Geraldine heard the 2 of them whispering through the thin wall, swapping stories about mothers who were gone and family who didn't want the trouble. Theo came 7 months after that. A house fire out on Cedar Row had made the evening news, faulty wiring in an old rental, and his grandmother hadn't made it out. The boy had barely, with burns up one arm and smoke sitting heavy in his little lungs. County social worker Yolanda Briggs, a practical woman in her 50s with tired shoulders and kind eyes, brought him to Geraldine's porch on a Friday evening and warned her this was only temporary, just until proper placement opened up. But Theo was so quiet, so hollowed out, he barely spoke a word for a month. He drew pictures of fire eating through walls. Geraldine would find him at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, sketching flames climbing toward a ceiling that wasn't even there anymore. She gave him books instead of matches, puzzles instead of nightmares, homework instead of grief with nowhere to go. "Nobody gets thrown away in my house," she told all 3 of them at their first dinner together at her old oak table. "You work hard, you tell the truth, and you look after each other. Those are the only rules that matter in this kitchen." Yolanda Briggs became a regular at the house, bringing paperwork and quiet warnings. "The county doesn't like complicated cases," she said once. 3 kids, 3 different last names, no formal adoption, no foster stipend. If the wrong person starts asking the wrong questions. But she also taught Geraldine to keep records, every report card, every doctor's visit, every signature. because good intentions without paper trails would never be enough to save anybody. The holding room door clanked open. "Judges ready for you, Pruitt?" the deputy said. Geraldine opened her eyes and stood slow. The memories faded like smoke off a stove, but the love underneath them stayed solid as bedrock. The courtroom felt heavier when she walked back in. Lowe's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Desmond Tully, had spread documents across the prosecution table like a hand of cards he was sure he'd already won. Judge Strick settled onto his bench wearing the look of a man who'd decided the ending before the trial even started. "Proceed, counselor." Marchetti rose again, younger than Geraldine had first guessed, maybe 43. Voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your Honor, the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate fraud spanning 22 years. Mrs. Pruitt collected charitable donations claiming to care for orphaned relatives. These children were not her family. No legal guardianship, no adoption papers, nothing official on record." Geraldine's cuffed hands clenched in her lap. "She used their circumstances to manipulate generous donors," Marchetti said. "Food drives for her boys and girl, school supplies for children who weren't legally hers to claim." From the gallery, someone gasped. Geraldine recognized the voice. Mrs. Odalis Furman from church, who'd organized 3 separate winter coat drives for Renato, Aliyah, and Theo over the years. Furthermore, Marchetti continued, Mrs. Pruitt repeatedly violated city housing code while pleading hardship. Carmela Diosa rose from the witness section, smug as cream. "I personally sent Mrs. Pruitt 19 violation notices over 6 years, Diosa testified. She ignored everyone, refused inspection, claimed she couldn't afford repairs while accepting donations meant for those children." Geraldine watched the woman lie with the smoothness of someone who'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Mr. Hale leaned over, tie crooked. "They're building a strong case, Mrs. Pruitt. The offer's still on the table." "No," Geraldine said, quiet but unmoving. Lowe's attorney stood next, silver-tongued and unhurried. "Your Honor, my client has offered fair market value, more than fair given the property's condition. Mrs. Pruitt's refusal, combined with her fraudulent conduct, has created a public nuisance requiring correction. Heritage Towers will bring quality housing and economic growth to a struggling block. The court should order forfeiture to cover the accumulated penalties." Mr. Hale gripped her arm. "Please, Mrs. Pruitt, Strick is known for throwing the book at people. Take the plea now. Keep your freedom. Fight and you could lose everything." Geraldine looked out at the gallery. Neighbors she'd known for 2 decades wouldn't meet her eyes. Strick leaned forward, voice dripping with false patience. "Mrs. Pruitt, this court sees this pattern often. The law exists to protect real charity from people who exploit it." Something hot rose up in Geraldine's chest and she stood, chains rattling. "Your Honor, those children had names. Renato, Aliyah, Theo. They had nightmares I sat up through and report cards I taped to my refrigerator. They didn't have price tags." Strick's face darkened. He reached for his gavel. "Mrs. Pruitt, this court has heard enough." And that's when the rear doors opened. Every head in the courtroom turned. The first to enter was tall and broad through the shoulders, dress blues crisp, ribbons across her chest catching the fluorescent light. Bronze Star. Combat ribbons. A woman who'd commanded convoys through places most people couldn't find on a map. Behind her came a man in a sharp navy suit carrying a thick legal folder like it weighed nothing, the careful walk of someone who'd spent a career in federal courtrooms. The third came in plain civilian clothes, a laptop bag slung over one shoulder, moving quiet and watchful, missing nothing. Geraldine grabbed the edge of the defense table, and her knees nearly buckled. 3 faces shaped by 3 very different lives, 3 different last names. But everyone in that courtroom could see in an instant who they belonged to. The woman in uniform stepped forward first. "Your Honor, the woman in those chains raised us when this county threw us away. My name is Colonel Aliyah Quarles, United States Army. I earned my commission because a woman with nothing taught me discipline meant something. You cannot simply walk into my—" Strick started, and Aliyah cut him off clean. "I can and I will, because I watched this woman go hungry so 3 children wouldn't have to." The man in the navy suit stepped up next, setting his folder down with a soft final thud. "I'm Assistant United States Attorney Renato Quinn. I'm entering my appearance on behalf of Mrs. Pruitt's defense, effective immediately." "This is highly irregular," Strick sputtered. It's irregular," Renato said evenly, "is prosecuting a woman for saving 3 lives this county couldn't be bothered to save itself." The third figure moved to Geraldine's side, voice quiet but carrying clear through the stunned silence. "I'm Theo Quinn, Digital Forensics Examiner, formerly with the Treasury Department's Inspector General Office." He lifted a sealed evidence case. "I've spent the last 48 hours inside this county's servers, and I've found things that don't add up." The gallery erupted in whispered noise. Phones came up to film. Garrison Lowe's confidence cracked for the first time, something uncertain flickering across his face as he stared at the ribbons, the federal badge, the laptop bag. None of this had been part of his plan. "This court will not become a circus," Strick said, banging his gavel, the sound thin and weak now. "This court," Alia said, voice carrying the full weight of command, already became something worse than a circus. It became a place where the truth was buried for 22 years. Renato opened his folder and laid documents across the defense table like he was building a wall. "Every charge against Geraldine Pruitt begins with a forged record. Your Honor, I'm requesting an emergency evidentiary delay to present documentation that contradicts the prosecution's entire timeline." "Absolutely not," Strick snapped. "This hearing has already—" "Physical impossibility is a complete defense to fraud," Renato continued, unbothered. Marchetti found her footing. "Your Honor, this is clearly a stalling tactic." Theo lifted the evidence case. "Ma'am, I can project the file metadata if the court has the equipment." Carmela Diosa's voice cracked from the gallery. "Metadata? 5 minutes," Strick growled. "Not 1 second more." The bailiff wheeled in an old projector while Theo's laptop hummed to life. Renato pulled the first document. "Your Honor, the prosecution claims Mrs. Pruitt signed a confession on the 8th of March. He held up a hospital wristband. "This is from Bellwether Memorial. Mrs. Pruitt was admitted on the 5th with 2 broken ribs after a fall at her overnight cleaning job. She was sedated until the 11th. The room went still. Theo's screen flickered to life on the wall, rows of timestamps and digital signatures. The confession was generated from a city terminal, not signed by hand. The login traces to the Code Enforcement Department." Carmela Diosa made a small choked sound. "The prosecution also claims Mrs. Pruitt ignored inspection notices for 2 years, Renato said. "Mr. Quinn, the metadata, please." Theo clicked forward, a list of edited files blooming across the wall. "These reports were all modified between January and April of this year. Every edit traces to user credentials belonging to Carmela Diosa." "That's impossible," Diosa burst out. "I never—" "Ma'am," Theo said quietly, "computers don't lie. The originals show Mrs. Pruitt requesting repairs over and over. Someone rewrote them later to show violations instead." A woman named Alia stepped forward. "No," the colonel, holding up a yellowed envelope. "Your Honor, I have letters from Yolanda Briggs, the county social worker, who handled our cases over 2 decades ago. She passed in 2019, but her family found these among her papers." She opened the envelope and pulled out handwritten pages. "Mrs. Briggs documented that the 3 of us were placed with Mrs. Pruitt through emergency kinship care because the county had no safe alternative. She wrote that Mrs. Pruitt should have been commended, not prosecuted." Renato took the letters and passed copies forward. "Mrs. Briggs specifically noted the county chose not to formalize the placements because doing so would expose how badly the system had already failed us." Marchetti scanned the pages, her face draining of color. "Your Honor, I was not made aware of these documents because they were buried," Alia said, an edge in her voice now. "Just like we would have been buried if this woman hadn't found us first." Strick stared at the evidence spread across the courtroom, the smugness gone from his face, replaced by something that looked a lot like fear. "This court will take a 30-minute recess," he announced. The gavel fell. Garrison Lowe was already whispering urgently to his lawyer. Carmela Diosa had slipped out of the gallery entirely. The tide had turned, but everyone in that room could feel there was more coming. That afternoon, the 3 of them drove Geraldine back toward Larkspur Avenue in Renato's rental car. No cuffs this time, though she was still in the county smock. "How did you know to come?" she asked quietly. "I saw a clip 2 days ago," Renato said from the front seat. "Local woman arrested for fraud. Showed your face for maybe 4 seconds. His voice thickened. 4 seconds, and I knew somebody was trying to destroy you. "We dropped everything," Alia said. "Theo flew in from Atlanta. I drove up from Benning. Renato caught the first flight out of D.C. We made calls," Theo added. "Federal contacts, forensic accountants, records people. When powerful men go after somebody defenseless, they leave footprints everywhere. They just don't expect anybody to go looking." When they turned onto Larkspur Avenue, Geraldine's breath caught. Her little brick house looked like it had been through a war. The porch railing torn loose, windows boarded, eviction notices stapled to the door in tattered yellow strips. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Theo parked and opened his laptop right there at the curb, fingers moving fast. "Mama Geraldine," he said after a few minutes, voice grim. "I found something else. Same pattern. Forged documents, altered inspections, rushed hearings." He looked up. 5 other houses on this block. All elderly homeowners, all targeted by low capital over the past 18 months. "They're taking the whole street," Renato said slowly. Theo turned his screen, a map dotted with red pins. Same playbook every time. Fake violations, inflated fines, friendly judge, forged paper. Geraldine stared at her ruined house, then at the map, the pieces sliding into place like dominoes falling in slow motion. "This was never just about me," Aliyah said quietly, hand on her shoulder. Police tape stretched across the porch, fluttering like a warning nobody had listened to in time. Inside, the living room looked like it had been turned upside down and shaken. The couch slashed open, stuffing spilling out like dirty snow. Family photographs torn and scattered across the floor. But it was the kitchen that broke something loose in Geraldine's chest. Her old oak table, the one where 3 hungry children had slowly become her family, gouged deep with boot heels and crowbar marks. "They didn't have to do this," she said softly, fingers trembling against the scarred wood. "They wanted to break your spirit," Aliyah said, jaw tight. This was never about the eviction. Theo moved room to room with his phone camera, photographing every shattered dish, every torn photo. "Evidence," he murmured. "Every scratch on this table, Lowe's crew did this, and I'm going to prove it." In the bedroom they found her papers scattered across the floor. School records, medical bills, church receipts, letters from teachers praising 3 children who'd come so far. 22 years of careful documentation thrown around like trash. She kept everything, Theo said, almost in wonder, gathering pages off the floor. Every report card, every thank you note. Through the broken front window they could see neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. An elderly woman named Florine Bass climbed the broken steps slowly, her own house down the block looking smaller somehow, like it had shrunk on itself out of fear. "Geraldine, honey," she said, voice shaking. "I heard what happened in court. I saw the children come home." Behind her came a man named Hosea Pruitt, no relation, just a man who leaned heavy on a cane, and a woman named Marisol Andrade, holding her grandson's hand. "They came to us too," Florine whispered. "Said our houses were hazards. Said they could make the problems go away if we just signed." Hosea nodded grimly. "Same lies. Same threats." Marisol's voice cracked. "They said my roof was dangerous. Demanded fees I didn't have. When I asked for time, they said I was being stubborn, like some other woman on this street." She looked at Geraldine, ashamed. "They meant you, didn't they?" "What did you do?" Aliyah asked gently. Florine's voice broke. "I signed. God forgive me. Sold my house for $9,000 when it's worth $60. They said if I didn't, they'd condemn it and I'd get nothing at all." The weight of it settled over all of them. This was never one stubborn old woman refusing to move. This was a machine that had been grinding through the whole block for a year and a half, crushing anyone too old or too poor or too alone to fight back. A news van screeched up to the curb. A reporter in a sharp blazer jumped out, microphone already raised, cameraman trailing behind. "Mrs. Pruitt, Channel 11 News. Is it true you exploited orphan children for financial gain?" The next morning came with the cruel brightness of a spotlight. Geraldine sat at her scarred kitchen table, coffee gone cold in her hands, while the television replayed the same story over and over, each repetition another twist of the knife. The screen cut to Garrison Lowe standing outside his glass office tower in a pressed suit, shaking his head with practiced sorrow. "This is heartbreaking," he said. Mrs. Pruitt manipulated the goodwill of churches and neighbors. She used 3 vulnerable children as props in a decades-long scheme. Renato's jaw tightened, still in his service blues from an early flight. "Those children weren't legally hers," Lowe went on. "She had no right to collect donations or present herself as their guardian." The report cut to Carmela Diosa standing in front of City Hall, stack of papers in hand. "Mrs. Pruitt ignored every housing violation we sent her. When we tried to help, she turned hostile. The children deserved better." Theo looked up from his laptop, grim. "They're good at this," he said. "Every lie's got just enough truth in it to sound believable." Old church footage rolled. Renato at 13, Aliyah at 11, Theo at 9, All in white shirts Geraldine had ironed herself, singing in the Christmas choir. The reporter's voice played over it. Sources say Pruitt used the children to solicit donations across multiple congregations. That's not what happened, Geraldine whispered, but her voice carried no weight in the room anymore. Renato killed the television with a sharp jab. It doesn't matter what really happened, Mama Geraldine. They're not interested in truth. They're building a story. His phone buzzed, then Theo's, then Alia's. Sapoina's, Renato said, reading. Pastor Vance, the food bank coordinator, everyone who ever helped raise us. They want testimony on what you received and from who. Theo's fingers flew across his keyboard. It gets worse. Somebody leaked your sealed welfare file to 3 news outlets. Every application, every benefit, every time you listed the children as dependents. Alia's phone rang. Her commanding officer. Her face went still as stone as she listened. Yes, sir. No, sir. I did not threaten anyone, sir. When she hung up, the kitchen had gone dangerously quiet. Lowe filed a formal complaint against me, she said slowly. Claims I approached him aggressively outside the courthouse. Says my military bearing felt threatening. That's impossible, Theo said. I was standing right there. You barely looked at him. Doesn't matter, Alia said, eyes burning but voice level. My command has to investigate any civilian complaint. Lowe knows exactly how the process works, and exactly how long it takes to ruin a career while it runs. Geraldine watched her children facing the slow unraveling of everything they'd built. This is my fault, she said quietly. I brought this down on all of you. No, Renato said firmly. This is what bullies do when they can't win clean. They go after everything you love until you fold. Theo's laptop chimed. The leak traced back to Diosa's credentials accessed at 11:52 at night. Same person who altered the inspection. They didn't grab random files either, he said, turning the screen. They skipped right past the emergency placement letters, the social worker recommendations. Everything that would have cleared you. They know exactly what they're doing, Geraldine whispered, and they're winning. Alia took her hand across the table. You saved our lives when we were children, Mama Geraldine. Now let us save yours, the right way. They spent the next afternoon turning the wrecked house inside out, gloved hands sorting through every drawer and closet that had been ransacked during the eviction attempt. We need everything, Renato said. If Lowe's people come back with another warrant, they don't get to twist a single piece of this. In the bedroom closet, Renato's hand closed around something small and metal pushed to the back shelf. A mason jar, lid rusted, a label in Geraldine's careful handwriting. Renato, boots. Inside, dozens of worn coins. He remembered those boots, plain black sneakers he'd wanted desperately in 7th grade while other kids wore name brands and his own had holes near the toe. Geraldine had surprised him 2 weeks before school started, claimed they'd been on clearance. Now he understood. Every coin in that jar was a bus fare she'd walked instead, a lunch she'd skipped, multiplied dozens of times until it added up to enough. Mama Geraldine, he said, throat tight. You saved coins for my boots? She looked up from her chair, eyes soft. You walk taller in those boots. Worth every penny to me. In a cardboard box of old papers, Alia found her high school debate trophy, wrapped in plastic, sitting beside a stack of medical bills stamped past due in red ink. The dates lined up exactly with the spring Geraldine had insisted on buying her a new blazer for the state championship. You went without your medicine so I could have that blazer, Alia said. Not quite a question. Geraldine's chin lifted. You earned that trophy. I wasn't about to let money keep you from looking the part. Theo, working through the bookshelf, found his first-place ribbon from a county science fair pressed inside Geraldine's worn Bible, between the pages of Psalms. He remembered that day clear as anything, his project on water filtration, the way Geraldine had hugged him so tight he could barely breathe, telling him he was going to do something with his life someday. You kept everything, he said, wondering. Course I did, she answered. You children were the only thing I ever did right. I wasn't about to forget a minute of it. In the hallway closet, Alia found an old steamer trunk pushed under boxes of Christmas decorations, its broken lock hanging loose. Inside, beneath moth-eaten blankets, sat manila folders stamped with the county seal, every page signed by Yolanda Briggs. The earliest letter, dated 3 months after Renato arrived, thanked Geraldine for providing emergency kinship care and noted that under placement protocol, her informal guardianship was legally recognized. But, as discussed, the letter read, the county prefers to limit official involvement in cases that might expose systemic placement failures. Aaliyah's hands shook reading it. More letters followed, same language for her own placement, then Theo's. Each one made it clear the county hadn't just allowed Geraldine's arrangement, they'd quietly relied on it while refusing to put it on paper. The final letter, written months before Briggs's death, was the most damning. Mrs. Pruitt, I'm retiring next month, but I feel I have to warn you. The county has discussed reviewing informal placements to limit liability. Translation, they may try to make your kindness look illegal to cover their own negligence. Keep everything. Document everything. Poor people need twice the proof to be believed half as much. If they ever come for you, remember you saved these children when we failed them first. With deep respect, Yolanda Briggs. Renato slammed his fist against the wall. They knew the whole time. More than that, Aaliyah said grimly. They knew they'd failed us first. Geraldine's crime was making them look incompetent. At the bottom of the trunk, Theo's fingers found a sealed manila envelope in Geraldine's handwriting. Open only if they come for the house. Rain started against the windows as Theo broke the seal. Inside were photocopied memos, Briggs's handwritten notes, and a small cassette tape labeled Strick Meeting, October. Briggs's final letter sat on top. If you're reading this, they've come for you as I feared. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I have proof. I met with Wendell Strick years ago about formalizing the children's placements, back when he was county council, not yet a judge. He told me plainly the county would not create official records. His exact words, that woman's doing us a favor, and, if we document it properly, it shows how badly we screwed up 3 separate cases. Let it lie. I recorded that meeting without his knowledge. On the tape you'll hear him admit you were providing lawful emergency care, and that official paperwork would only create liability headaches for the county. Wendell Strick has known from the very beginning that you broke no law. He helped bury the truth to protect his own career. Now he sits on the bench, pretending ignorance while presiding over your destruction. Use this carefully. Men like him don't fall quiet. With love and fury, Yolanda Briggs. One line further down made Renato's blood run hot. Strick laughed when I suggested Mrs. Pruitt deserved formal recognition. He said, she's poor and black. Nobody expects her to have paperwork anyway. Jesus, Renato whispered. He set her up from day one. A sharp knock cut through the moment. Process server soaked through, holding a thick envelope. Civil forfeiture action. 48 hours to respond or forfeit all claim to the property. Hearing scheduled Thursday morning, Renato said, scanning the page, face going pale. That's the day before our evidentiary hearing. They're not just lying, Geraldine said quietly, watching rainwater pool on the broken porch. They're racing us. The courthouse buzzed with tension that Wednesday. Reporters packed the back wall. Geraldine entered in cuffs again, but this time Renato, Aaliyah, and Theo flanked her. Federal badge, dress uniform, forensic case, all in plain sight. Renato called Carmela Diosa to the stand first, then walked her through 31 repair requests bearing her own department's timestamp. Each one she'd sworn under oath never existed. Confusion or perjury, Ms. Diosa? He asked coldly, and the courtroom went dead silent. Theo took the stand next, connecting his laptop to the display. The confession document was created at 11:52 at night. Your Honor. Mrs. Pruitt was arrested at 6 a.m. that same morning. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as the timeline collapsed in front of everyone watching. Aaliyah called Florine Basque and 2 other elderly homeowners, each one telling the same story. Fabricated violations, manufactured fear, forced sales at a fraction of value. Strick's face grew redder with every testimony, until finally he had no choice. The court finds insufficient evidence to support the fraud charges. Mrs. Pruitt is released pending further investigation. The gallery erupted. Geraldine's legs nearly gave out as the cuffs came off, and then federal marshals pushed through the crowd outside the courthouse, badges raised. Geraldine Pruitt, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering through charitable organizations. The new cuffs clicked shut before anyone could speak. That night, in a federal holding cell, Geraldine watched the local news on a television bolted high on the wall, footage of her front porch being torn apart under floodlights, her old oak table split down the middle in the front yard like a heart cut clean in two. Renato's truck screeched to the curb. "Stop your machines right now," he told the foreman, voice low and dangerous. "Renato." "No," Aaliyah said, pulling him back. That's exactly what they want. While he stood there shaking, Theo slipped inside the broken house and found dented coffee cans hidden behind the drywall, receipts, school forms, vaccination records, and a final letter from Yolanda Briggs tucked inside plastic. For Geraldine. Poor people need proof because rich people erase our truth. At dawn the next morning, in a borrowed back room with an old tape deck, Briggs's recorded voice finally crackled to life. From 22 years in the past, Wendell Strick's voice young and unmistakable, laying out the cover-up in his own words, line by damning line. The Pruitt woman has those kids, and frankly that's better than the alternative. We don't document it. If this surfaces later, it shows how bad we failed them. Let sleeping dogs lie. That bastard, Renato said. He's known all along. Theo, meanwhile, had broken through layers of the city's deleted files and found emails stitching the whole conspiracy together. Diosa to Lowe, confirming altered reports. Lowe to Strick, confirming a fast-tracked hearing. Strick to Lowe, promising he could only delay scrutiny so long. They coordinated everything, Renato said. This wasn't corruption. It was a conspiracy with a payroll. Isaiah sent copies racing out by courier to the state attorney general, federal prosecutors, and 3 reporters who'd been circling Lowe's other developments for months. If they try to bury it again, he said, it'll already be too late. Friday morning, the courthouse steps filled before sunrise. Veterans, elderly homeowners clutching folders, neighbors carrying photographs of houses they'd lost. Renato walked up in his federal suit, Aliyah in dress uniform, Theo a step behind with his laptop bag, an army of people behind them who'd had enough of injustice hiding behind legal paper. Inside, every seat was filled. Strick entered pale and irritated, banging his gavel too hard. Renato informed the court that representatives from the state attorney general's office were present, and 2 men in dark suits in the 3rd row gave the smallest nod. The whole room shifted under that weight. Theo's evidence filled the screen, timestamps, edited files, payment records, Diosa's late-night logins tied directly to Low Capital Bank transfers. Tanya Carmela stood, voice cracking. Those could have been hacked. Could anyone have deposited these payments into your personal account too, Ms. Diosa? Theo asked, and the next screen answered for her. Renato lifted the small cassette player. Your Honor, this is authenticated evidence of a conversation between you and county officials 22 years ago, when you served as county counsel. Strick's objection died in his throat as the tape played, his own younger voice condemning him in front of every camera in the room. The gallery exploded. A woman in the front row stood, voice cutting clean through the noise. Your Honor, I'm Special Investigator Marguerite Solis, with the State Attorney General's office. Step aside from this case immediately. Behind her came a senior court administrator with an emergency order from the Judicial Commission, suspending Strick's authority on the spot. A younger judge entered to take the bench, calm where Strick had been imperious, and called the courtroom to order with a single, steady voice. Carmela Diosa broke under questioning within minutes, admitting to $15,000 from Lowe spread across 6 months, admitting to 6 other targeted properties on the block, all elderly, all chosen because they weren't expected to fight back. All charges against Geraldine Pruitt are dismissed with prejudice, the new judge ruled. The forfeiture order is voided. Mr. Lowe's development permits are suspended pending criminal investigation. Ms. Diosa, you're under arrest for evidence tampering and conspiracy. Remove Mrs. Pruitt's restraints immediately. The bailiff's keys turned and the cuffs fell away from Geraldine's wrists for the last time. 2 months passed like water washing away a stain that had sat too long. Garrison Lowe sat in a federal holding facility awaiting trial on racketeering charges that could keep him there for 20 years. Carmela Diosa's cooperation cracked open a network of bought inspectors and forged paperwork stretching back nearly a decade. 5 other families on Larkspur Avenue got their restitution hearings. Florine Bass got her house back. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Geraldine Pruitt stood on her rebuilt porch in a navy church dress with pearl buttons. Nothing left of the county smock but memory. The kitchen wall had been rebuilt, the dining table restored down to its original scratches. A banner stretched between 2 oak trees out front read, "The Geraldine Pruitt House Youth Center Dedication." Renato stood to her left in his federal best, Aliyah to her right in dress uniform, Theo just behind with a small recorder in hand to capture the moment the way he'd once captured the evidence that set her free. "We gather today," Pastor Vance said from behind a folding podium, "to honor a woman who never once asked for thanks. She simply saw children who needed love and gave them everything she had." Renato stepped forward and opened a leather folder. "Mama Geraldine, the counties asked me to deliver these corrected records, recognizing you as the emergency kinship caregiver who protected 3 children when the system failed them." He placed a framed certificate in her hands. "They've also established the Geraldine Pruitt Emergency Child Placement Fund, so other women like you can help without ever being called criminals for it." Geraldine looked down at the raised seal, the signatures of people who had once pretended she didn't exist at all. 22 years too late," she said softly. Then, after a moment, she smiled. "But better late than never." She turned the heavy brass key over once in her palm and walked back through the door of the only home she had ever needed to be proud of.